So we are group 2 for the Kearns lecture, and we are going to be talking about the national debt. The United States has carried debt since its inception. Over the past 100 years, the national debt has grown from $408 billion to $31 trillion. The national debt is the amount of money that the United States owes to its creditors. It represents the sum of past annual budget deficits. In a given fiscal year, when government spending exceeds government revenue, a budget deficit is the result. In the last 50 years, the U.S. government has only ran a budget surplus 5 times. The United States government needs debt to pay for services and programs for the American public. The federal government needs to borrow money to pay its bills when its ongoing spending activities and investments cannot be funded by federal revenues alone. The government sells marketable securities such as treasury bonds, bills, notes, floating rate notes, and treasury inflation-protected securities. The United States debt is held primarily by the public, followed by foreign governments, banks, and investors.
This first graph shows the change in the trend of the United States national debt as it seems from the 1990s, a slight increase in public debt, which increased overall from $3,604 billion, which is around $11,000 per person in the U.S. in 1995, to $24,459 billion, which is about $75,000 per person in the U.S. in 2022. A key note to also go over from this graph is the percentage of the foreign holdings also went up 7% from 1995 to 2022, going up from 23% to 30%. As that key indicator also may have some influence on the overall United States national debt to increase slightly from this period trend as well. This next graph shows a 150-year view of the U.S. national debt, but mainly we are going to focus on post-COVID-19 pandemic. The United States national debt made a slight jump, which resulted in approximately a 98.2 overall national debt increase since the COVID-19 pandemic first occurred, which is also approximately 40% higher than the Great Recession.
Of the $31 trillion of debt owed by the United States, about $25 trillion of this is owned by the public. This just means that it's owned by people or institutions outside of the US government itself. The largest portion of this debt is owned by foreign nations, the top 3 of which are Japan, China, and the United Kingdom. This amounts to about $7 trillion of debt. Within the US, the Federal Reserve owns about $6 trillion, while mutual funds, banks, and state or local governments own about $8 trillion. The last piece is that the US government itself owns about $6 trillion. This is because of agencies such as Social Security purchasing US debt securities.
Silicon Valley Bank is no more.
And in the last 24 hours, many founders, investors that I've talked to have been desperately trying to get their money out.
Our banking system is in a fundamentally different place than it was, a decade ago.
And the economists are now asking if the Fed will hit pause on further rate increases.
The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank in March triggered massive deposit withdrawals and placed a renewed focus on lenders' financial health. More recently, the sector was hit by ratings downgrades when S&P last month cut credit ratings and revised down for multiple U.S. banks. Banks need higher cash flows and meet liabilities as customers withdraw deposits and to offset risks such as loan losses as the Federal Reserve keeps interest rates high to cool economic growth and inflation. Mid-sized banks are also worried about upcoming regulations. Since March, regulatory focus has heightened, prompting banks to focus on key capabilities in liquidity and asset liability management. Since then, banks have been taking steps to boost liquidity by reducing investments in securities or selling them at a loss.
My name is Luca, and I'm going to be talking about the U.S. banking risk and the risk of debt in the United States. High levels of government debt can raise concerns about fiscal sustainability. When a significant portion of the government budget is allocated to servicing national debt, it limits the ability to finance other important programs and spending due to high interest payments. Excessive borrowing can also lead to increased interest rates, crowding out private investment and hindering economic growth and job creation. Additionally, high debt may prompt the government to resort to printing more money and to cover its debt, potentially causing inflation and eroding citizens' purchasing power. With the United States' highly interconnected banking system, the failure of a major bank, as seen in the 2008 financial crisis, can result in systematic financial instability. Reforms such as those introduced in the Consumer Protection Act aim to mitigate these risks by strengthening capital requirements and enhancing oversight to reduce systematic risk.